Are you a fan like me where you like to scroll around Facebook sports pages from time to time just to see what the fans are saying? Have you opened up a comment section only to be bombarded by these 3-1 lead jokes and you did nothing to deserve this conversation? Have you finally gotten fed up with the 3-1 lead jokes? Well, I got news for you. They're not going anywhere anytime soon because blowing a 3-1 lead is probably the most humiliating way to lose a series, and as a matter of fact, I think it's kinda worse than getting swept. When you get swept, you know you pretty much had no chance against the team you were going against, but when you lose 3-1, there's just something extra to it that kinda rips your heart out if you're a fan of that team. But something interesting I've been noticing is that it doesn't seem like people know how many teams have blown a 3-1 lead in the past, and I'm not just talking about the Clippers and the Thunder recently, but if you go years back, plenty of teams have blown a 3-1 lead, and that's what I'm here to talk to you guys about today. The art of blowing a 3-1 lead dates back all the way to the 60s, and we're going to talk about that all the way up to last year's finals, and I'm not going to be mentioning the recent modern ones because we all know the stories behind those. So I'm not going to be talking about the Clippers, not going to talk about the Warriors, and I'm not going to talk about the Thunder because A, I've kind of talked about these in previous videos, and B, we just all know the premise behind them, so there's no reason. So without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about some teams you might be able to make up some 3-1 jokes about. Number 6, the Magic and Pistons, 2003. So when this series went down, I was in the second grade all clueless about the fact that Orlando had one of the NBA's best players, actually the leading scorer Tracy McGrady at the time to be exact. Of course, this is back when McGrady was still young and spry. He was averaging 32 points a game on 45% field goal shooting, drawing comparisons to Kobe Bryant. As a matter of fact, some people say he was better than Kobe at the time. And he was basically carrying around the same curse so many superstars carry around today. His roster was absolute trash. Despite this, T-Mac was so good that he was able to carry the Orlando Magic to an 8th seed, which was about 40 or 41 wins at the time, and this set them up for a first round playoff matchup against the Detroit Pistons. Now, before I go on with this, it's important to note that the Pistons actually gave up the least amount of points of any team in the NBA on a nightly basis at about 87 points a game, and being that they were going up against the Magic who were basically just Tracy McGrady, this series should have been cake and probably should have been a sweep, but that's just a testament to how damn good Tracy McGrady was. T-Mac was able to win game 1 on the road by 5 points, and he scored 43 of the 99 Magic points in that game, so if that doesn't show you he was doing basically everything, I don't know what does. And what's even more impressive, he did that on 53% field goal shooting. He upped that to 46 in the next game on 61% field goal shooting, however they ended up losing that game. The Magic actually went on to win the next 2 games, and that's what gave them the 3-1 lead, and then the Pistons finally just completely clamped down and they won the next 3 games all by blowout, so it wasn't even close. But when you look at it, it's just completely evident that Tracy McGrady wore down, and he was worn down by the Pistons defense. Look at his field goal percentage to start the series. He was hanging around 50, pretty much 50 or so, despite that 161% field goal night he had. After that, it never got above 40 again, so he shot 36%, 40, 39, and 29. So Pistons defense really just grinded him down, and the Pistons won that series rightfully so, because with the roster the Magic had, they should have never been up 3-1 in the first place. And this was basically just consistent with a long line of failure in Tracy McGrady's playoff career, because for those of you that didn't know, when Tracy McGrady was on the Spurs, that finals team in 2013, that was his first time he had ever made it out of the first round. He'd never been to the second round in his playoff career, so blowing his 3-1 lead, he could have took that off his resume, and he pretty much just had to join the Spurs at the end of his career when it no longer mattered. But I still love T-Mac. Number 5, Lakers vs Suns, 2006. So I figured since I just got done talking about a one-man team that wasn't supposed to be up 3-1 in the first place, why not go ahead and talk about another one? Yeah, you already know, you've seen the famous highlights from this series, the Kobe Bryant game winner, and that was all from the series where the Lakers had a 3-1 lead on the Suns, and this was about to be a huge upset because nobody expected this Lakers roster to be able to pull that off in the first place. It is important to mention that the Suns were missing Amari Stoudemire, which is probably what allowed this to happen, because had they have had Stoudemire, who was definitely a superstar at the time, the series probably would not have been close, but whatever, you get what you get. And there was a lot riding on this series because not only would the Lakers probably have made the Western Conference Finals that year, this was the year where a lot of people felt like Kobe Bryant deserved the MVP, but it was given to Steve Nash instead. Now, mind you, the MVP was not given to Steve Nash until after Game 7, which was I think the day after Game 7 actually, where they eliminated the Lakers. So had the Lakers have upset the Suns, who knows, maybe the MVP would have went to Kobe. But you should do some research on Nash because he actually did transform that Suns team. We're not going to get into it right now though. So I've talked about Kobe Bryant's game winner against the Suns. You can go see that video whenever you have time, but one thing I didn't talk about is what happened after that game, because Kobe Bryant had another historic performance that actually ended up pretty fruitless because, well, he just didn't have the team around him. In Game 6 of that series, Kobe had a night for the ages that I've never seen anybody mention, where he scored 50 points, 8 rebounds, and 5 assists in an overtime loss to the Suns. But the one thing you should know is that the Lakers were dangerously close to putting the Suns out. As a matter of fact, it came down to about the last 10 seconds where the Suns were down by 3. They were fumbling the ball. I mean, they were so close to elimination. But, you know, Laker fans, you have Tim Thomas to thank for that clutch 3 he hit to send the game into overtime, and where they would eventually beat the Lakers. Then they would beat them in Game 7. Another important note for Game 7 is that in the second half of Game 7, where the Lakers were pretty much already getting blown out by the Suns, Kobe Bryant only attempted 3 second half shots. This caused a lot of people, including Charles Barkley, to call him selfish. Some people accused him of quitting, and there's actually a nice clip I'm going to link you to in this video where you can see Kobe Bryant and Charles Barkley hash this out on live TV, and you can decide if you think he quit or not. Regardless, one thing we can't change is that they did blow that 3-1 lead to the Suns, so there goes another one. Number 4. The Heat and Knicks, 1997. So it's ironic that I just made a video about the 90s, and in that I was talking about rivals, but I don't think I made a mention of the Knicks and Heat. And if they weren't the only teams to do this, I'm pretty sure they're one of the only teams to play each other 4 consecutive years in the playoffs, so imagine something like that. 1997 was actually the beginning of this rivalry, and it got pretty ugly because I'm pretty sure we've all seen that huge fight that everybody got into, but I don't think a lot of people realize that fight is almost, well, no, it is what cost the Knicks that series. The Knicks had themselves a squad that year with people like Patrick Ewing, Larry Johnson, John Starks, and they were primed to take on the Chicago Bulls and challenge them for dominance in the Eastern Conference Finals, which is what a lot of people were looking forward to. This seemed well on its way because the Knicks were up 3-1 going into Game 5, looking to close the game out. But at the end of this game that the Knicks had basically already lost, at the free throw line, PJ Brown gets tangled up with Charlie Ward and ends up body slamming him, as you can see in the video, and this skirmish pretty much ended up in the Knicks bench emptying. Now, if you didn't know, the NBA has a rule where during the altercation, you're not allowed to leave the bench or you pretty much will get suspended, and they've laid their foot down multiple times on this rule. Unfortunately for the Knicks, Patrick Ewing, Charlie Ward, Larry Johnson, Allen Houston, and John Starks were all suspended from the incident. That's basically their whole damn squad, but that's not even the worst part. So this happened in Game 5, right? Well, there was still Game 6 to go and a potential Game 7. By NBA rule, you have to have at least 9 players suited up for a game, which meant some players spent Game 6 out and another portion of the players served their suspension in the Game 7. So this basically meant regardless of what happened, the Knicks were screwed one way or another. The New York Knicks would go on to lose the series, and that's another hole in history because a lot of people wonder what would have happened if the Knicks got to duke it out with the Bulls that year in '97. Most people believe the Bulls would have won anyways, but you know, we'll never know. Number 3, 1995 Phoenix Suns vs. the Houston Rockets. So let's turn the clock back to actually just a few months before I was born, back in '95, where the Suns were facing the Rockets, and the Rockets were actually on their quest to repeat at this time. They had won the championship in 1994, and the funny story about this is they actually beat the Suns in a 7-game series the year before, so this set up a bit of a revenge match coming in for this. There was a lot of storylines going into it. The Suns were looking to dethrone the Rockets as defending champions, and looking to get revenge from the year before, where they actually blew a 2-0 lead, if that's a thing. So this time the Suns actually end up building a 3-1 lead, and it looks like all but a sure thing as Game 5 is in Phoenix. And just to show you how close Phoenix got to winning this game, what you're currently seeing on your screen is the shot that could have definitely ended the Rockets. It would have been a game-winning 3-pointer, the Rockets would have went home, never would have repeated, and that whole legacy that we now know about wouldn't exist. That's how close it came to happening. However, when that didn't happen, the Rockets ended up beating the Suns in the overtime of that game, and Hakeem Olajuwon actually said that you could basically see the momentum was taken from them. You could see it in their eyes that they just weren't the same, but it wasn't all wrapped up with the bow, because even if they did get to a Game 7, that was going to be on Phoenix's home floor. And as fate would have it, it did end up going 7 games, and it actually produced one of the most famous moments in NBA history. Now, the Suns, they tried to trap Kenny Smith and force him into throwing a bad cross-court pass that they would have definitely picked off. But Kenny Smith was very wise, kept his cool, got it to Robert Horry, and then Horry got it to Mario Elie, who was standing wide open for a good second or two. I have no clue what this guy was waiting on. Anyways, he did end up getting a wide open shot, gave Houston the 3-point lead, and from that moment on, you could basically tell that it was just fate for Houston to win this series. Mario Elie looks at the Suns bench and blows them the kiss of death, as he had basically just ripped their hearts out, tells them to go home, and this is probably one of the more painful losses in NBA history. When you think about it, Charles Barkley never had a ring, and in this series he had a chance to dethrone the Houston Rockets as NBA champions, beat the team that beat him the season before that, and go to the NBA Finals where he would not have had to face Michael Jordan, so he had a great chance at winning an NBA championship. But we all know that's where Hakeem Olajuwon went to dominate Shaq, and the rest is history. Number 2, Celtics vs Sixers 1968. So at the beginning of this video, I promised we were going to get to the origins of blowing 3-1 leads, and this is actually where it happened back in 1968 with Wilt Chamberlain's defending champion Sixers to the Boston Celtics. Now this is very interesting because, as we all know, this time basically belonged to the Boston Celtics. However, it looked like it was Wilt's turn and that a new page was turning because, like I said, they had just won the championship the year before, and now they held a 3-1 lead against the aging Boston Celtics. Boston had won basically all the championships in the 60s at this time besides the one in 67, and it just kind of looked time for it to go ahead and turn over. However, great teams just have a way of finding ways to win, especially when you have the greatest winner of all time, Bill Russell, on your team. Despite being down 3-1 in this series, Boston found a way to fight back, and they just very narrowly won Game 7 with a score of 100-96. Now, it's a very popular thing to say, you know, people who think about the 60s, they talk about how Wilt Chamberlain was always by himself and Bill Russell had the better team. However, this is one of those cases where you can't exactly say Wilt didn't have help. If you take a look at the averages for this series, he had Hall of Famer Hal Greer on his team, who averaged 26 points, Wilt averaged 22 himself, Chet Walker averaged 20, Wally Jones had 13, Luke Jackson had 10, so there was definitely some offensive help from that side. Now, of course, the Boston Celtics had a lot of help of their own, and they were, you know, they're one of the greatest teams of all time, so it's not like they're really easy to beat. In any case, this started a series of heartbreak for Wilt Chamberlain, who would go on to lose 2 more Game 7s, and you know, there was a big stereotype about Wilt back then that he was this great individual guy, but he could never get that consistent championship level success that Bill Russell could, and that's something that was really held against him, and sometimes when people talk about him being the greatest of all time, it's still brought up, so that's something we're definitely going to get to in another video. Number 1, Celtics vs Sixers 1981. Isn't it ironic that this same series popped up 13 years later, but this time it was the start of another Boston Celtics dynasty? Well, not only did Larry Bird and the Celtics handle this in the way of going to win the championship against the Houston Rockets a little bit later, but this is widely regarded as the greatest playoff series of all time, and for good reason. This was Robert Parrish's first year with the Boston Celtics and Kevin McHale's rookie year, so like I said, the beginning of the Boston dynasty. And I'm telling you right now, I'm very glad I was not alive for this series, because as a Celtics fan, my heart simply could not have handled the stress. Let me show you what I'm talking about. After Boston goes down 3-1, they rallied back to win the series, but when you look at the scores of the games 5, 6, and 7 were all decided by 2 points or less. That means Boston was always only 1 possession away from getting eliminated. Not even to mention that in Game 4, which Boston actually lost, that was also a 2-point game. So yeah, as a Boston fan, I would have just been dead. That would have been it for me. Game 7 came down to the last possessions as Larry Bird hit a clutch bank shot to put him up, and the Sixers had a chance to try an inbound alley to win the game with 1 second left. The pass went away, hit the top of the backboard, and that was it. And you see this famous shot of Larry Bird grabbing his head like he just cannot believe what just happened. They eliminate the Sixers, that was the Eastern Conference Finals, go on to play the Rockets, and that's Larry Bird's first championship. Amazing success story right there. Anyways, there you have it. That's 6 other stories about teams that blew 3-1 leads. I realized that none of these are as important as the one that Golden State just blew because that was in the NBA Finals, and I'm not going to take up for them because being up 3-1 in the finals against a team that everyone said you couldn't beat healthy, unanimous MVP, 73-9, I mean, oh man, that is the most painful loss for any sports fan that's a Warriors. If you're a Warriors fan, that has to be the most painful thing to experience. I can't even imagine what y'all go through. Actually, I can, because every time I'm on Facebook, I see you guys getting reminded about it. So hopefully you guys know some stories about some other teams that blew painful 3-1 leads, and you know, I released you guys on the Facebook, and maybe now you guys can counter it. Every time you see a Warriors joke, you could be like, hey, Dr.J blew a 3-1 lead, or you know, whatever. I don't really care. Do what you do with it. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. I'm Dom2K, and I'll see you guys on the next video.